Hi, so today we're going to talk about dotted rhythms. So in order to play dotted rhythms, first we need to know how the dot is operating on a note. So we'll start with a really easy dotted note. We'll start with the dotted half note. Looks like this. So in order to know how long to hold this for, we need to know how much time this dot is adding on to our half note. So when we're starting with a dotted half note, first we need to know how long is a half note. So a half note is worth 2 beats. So the way that the dot works is that the dot adds on half of the value of the note it's attached to. So if we know that the dot is worth half of this note, we know that half of 2 is 1. So we're going to add on the dot, which is 1, plus the entire value of the note that it's attached to, which is the half note, which is 2. So we know that 2 plus 1, or 1 plus 2, equals 3 beats. So that's how we get the value of our dotted half note. So we have to remember this rule over here, that the dot, no matter what it's attached to, it's worth half of that note. So when the dot is attached to different notes, we have to know how long is the note it's attached to. So we're going to start working with another important dotted rhythm, the dotted quarter note, which is almost always followed by a single eighth note. So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's figure out how much this is worth. So let's start with our quarter note. How much is a quarter note worth? Well, a quarter note is worth 1 beat. And if we remember our dot rule, our dot is worth half of this. So our dot is worth half. So if we think about what's half of 1, well, half of 1 is half. So number 2, our dot is actually worth half of a beat plus the actual value of the quarter note. So we need half plus 1 equals 1.5 beats. So our dotted quarter note is worth 1.5 beats. It's really the same idea as a quarter note plus an eighth note, because we know that an eighth note is worth half of. So in order to count to 1.5, or to really just count any accurate way in music, we're going to talk really quickly about subdividing. So subdividing is counting to the lowest value that you have in a given piece of music. So just for simplicity today, we're going to subdivide using eighth notes. So we know that an eighth note, just one eighth note, so not an entire pair of eighth notes, but just one of these guys, is worth half of a beat. So we know that half plus half makes 1. So a pair of eighth notes makes 1 beat. But one of the eighth notes is only worth half. So in order to count eighth notes, we have to count like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So if we want to think about putting quarter notes where our eighth notes are, one quarter note is the same size as a pair of eighth notes: 1, 2, 3, 4. But to play the full value of a quarter note, you have to think about squeezing in both halves of an eighth note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So now that brings us to our dotted our dotted quarter note. So if we're subdividing, it'll be so much easier to count our dotted quarter note rhythm, which looks like this. Here's our dotted quarter note, followed by our single eighth note from before. So we know that it's an entire quarter note plus half of a beat, which is the same as one of our eighth notes, and it gets almost always followed by a single eighth note. So if we kind of match it up linearly like this, we come up with 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. So that's the best way to count a dotted quarter note. And here's what it sounds like if we go play it. Okay, so here's what it would sound like if I played my dotted quarter note plus my single eighth note in a rhythm. I'm going to use 2 different notes so that you can hear the difference between the dotted quarter note and the single eighth note. 1 and 2 and. 1 and 2 and. So you can hear that the first note is only a little bit longer than a quarter note would normally be because it only has half of a beat added on to it. 1 and 2 and. So that's how that works.